They called it a test, but everyone in that lab knew what it really was. A death sentence. A single human had been captured during one of the border skirmishes near the Dominion front. The alien commanders thought he would make the perfect specimen. They had studied humans before, but never this closely, never like this. They wanted to know what made humans so strange. How they could survive in the harshest worlds. Fight even when outnumbered and keep standing when logic said they should fall. So, they put him in a containment dome, a glass cage filled with jungle terrain, thick mist and shadows that hid danger. They told the others it was for science, but deep down everyone was watching to see how long a human could last against monsters. Inside the dome, two beasts from the death world of Targash waited. Huge clawed and covered in scales that could stop bullets. They had been known to tear armored drones apart. No one, no living creature, had ever lasted more than a few minutes in the same enclosure with them. When the human was pushed through the airlock door, the crowd of Dominion officers and scientists watched from behind reinforced glass. Some smirked, expecting a quick end. Others were quietly curious. They had heard stories that humans came from a world almost as dangerous as Targash, a place full of storms, predators, and diseases that would kill other species in hours. But none of them believed those tales. To them, humans were just primitive soldiers, useful but replaceable. At first, the man didn't move. He stood still, scanning everything around him. The beasts circled in the shadows, their yellow eyes glinting through the mist. One of the scientists whispered, "He's frozen in fear." But that wasn't fear. That was observation. The human's eyes flicked over the trees, the rocks, the small pools of muddy water. He noticed the humidity, the direction of the wind, and the faint animal tracks in the soil. He crouched low, testing the ground under his hands. His movements were slow, deliberate, like someone who had lived through chaos before. In the control room, they increased the sound feed. The low growls of the beasts echoed through the dome. One of them began to stalk forward, massive claws scraping against stone. The other crept from the side, trying to flank him. The human turned his head slightly, just enough to see both of them at once. The first beast lunged. The crowd held its breath, but instead of running, the human dove sideways, rolling through the mud, grabbing a fallen branch. It wasn't much, just a thick piece of wood, but he used it like a weapon, jabbing it at the creature's face. The beast roared, surprised more than hurt, and backed off a step. The scientists murmured, he should have died in the first strike. Instead, he was standing again, backing into the trees. From that point on, it became a strange kind of dance. The beasts circling, the human keeping his distance, never letting them come from both sides. Hours passed. The observers grew restless. No one had ever lasted this long. The human began to change tactics. He used broken metal pieces from the old feeders inside the dome to sharpen his branch. He found vines strong enough to tie together and made simple traps. He smeared mud on his skin, blending into the environment. The scientists didn't understand what he was doing. They thought he was losing his mind. But those who had studied humans before began to realize he wasn't losing control. He was adapting. The beasts started to act differently too. Their movements became cautious, hesitant. They sniffed the air constantly, unsure where the human had gone. In the observation deck, one of the guards laughed nervously. The predators looked scared. The senior researcher frowned. Predators don't get scared, but the screens told a different story. The beasts were pacing, their tails twitching, their ears alert. Something inside them, something ancient, told them danger was near. Deep inside the dome, the human crouched behind a fallen tree, breathing quietly. His eyes were steady. The first beast crept close, sniffing the ground. It stepped over the trap he had made without noticing. When it turned its head, a sharp spear made of wood and metal hit it in the neck. It didn't kill the creature, but it was enough to make it stumble back, roaring in pain. The second beast charged forward. The human ran, not away but around, leading it into a patch of unstable soil near the dome's edge. He had noticed it earlier, how the ground there shifted slightly when he stepped on it. The creature followed, roaring until the ground gave way and it fell into the shallow pit he'd prepared. Mud splashed everywhere. The beast thrashed, trying to climb out. The human didn't waste time. He ran to a metal pipe that had broken off near the feeder unit, jammed it into the ground above the pit, and used the vines to trap the creature's legs. He worked fast, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before, like a man who had hunted to survive. When the beast finally stopped struggling, panting heavily, the dome went silent. The human stood still, covered in mud, breathing hard but calm. He looked at the second beast, still alive but hesitant to come closer. For the first time, the predator didn't attack. It backed away slowly, eyes fixed on him, growling low, a sound of warning, not rage. In the control room, no one spoke. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. "End the test," someone finally whispered. But the senior officer shook his head. "Not yet. I want to see what he does next." Inside, the human didn't seem to hear the alarms or see the blinking lights. He just stared at the creature trapped in the mud, then at the one that had retreated. Slowly, he picked up his broken spear, walked toward the water pool, and washed the mud from his face. His reflection stared back at him, tired, sharp, alive. He muttered something under his breath. No one could hear it through the static. But from his expression, it wasn't anger or fear. It was focus. Hours later, when the guards came to open the door and retrieve him, they found the dome in ruins. The jungle was torn apart. One beast was unconscious, tied down with vines and metal. The other was hiding in the corner, eyes wide, refusing to move closer to the human. The guards hesitated to enter. Even though they had blasters ready, something in the man's eyes made them nervous. He didn't look wild, he looked aware, alert, like someone who could read their every move. He didn't attack them. He didn't shout or beg. He simply stood there, breathing slow, and said quietly, "Is this what you wanted to see?" No one answered. When they took him back to his holding cell, the scientists began analyzing the footage. They replayed the moment the beast first hesitated. They watched his movements frame by frame, trying to understand how he predicted their behavior, but no data could explain it. "He shouldn't have survived," one of them said softly. Another replied, "Maybe that's what makes them dangerous." The Dominion officers didn't speak about the experiment publicly, but the story spread quickly through whispers. How a human had been locked inside with Death World predators and came out alive. How even the beasts refused to fight him after that. Some claimed the creatures still flinched when humans walked near their cages, as if they remembered the scent of fear. And though the Dominion tried to hide the truth, deep down, everyone who saw that footage knew what they had witnessed wasn't luck or chance. It was something else, something that couldn't be measured by numbers or science. It was the quiet, unstoppable instinct of survival that humans carried deep inside them. The experiment was supposed to show human weakness. Instead, it reminded everyone watching that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its weapons or machines. It was its mind. Its refusal to break even when trapped in a cage. The beasts were supposed to terrify him, but by the end it was clear he had terrified them both. The next day, the entire Dominion research base buzzed with quiet tension. Everyone had seen the recording. Some refused to believe it was real. They said the footage was edited, or that the beasts were sedated. But those who had been in the control room knew the truth. The human had survived on his own. The commanding officer ordered another round of studies. He wanted to understand what had happened. How could one being from a low-tier planet outsmart the most feared predators in captivity? It didn't make sense. The scientists argued that maybe humans had some hidden biological advantage. The soldiers whispered that it wasn't biology at all. It was something far more dangerous. Inside his holding cell, the human sat on the cold floor, his eyes fixed on the wall. His clothes were torn, his body bruised, but he didn't look broken. He was quiet. Too quiet. When the guards brought food, he didn't eat immediately. He looked at it carefully, then at them, as if he were reading their expressions, their movements. The guards found excuses to leave quickly. No one liked being alone with him. A few hours later, the research team came in. They wanted to take blood samples, check his heartbeat, and test his reflexes. The human didn't resist, but his eyes followed every instrument they touched. It was as if he knew exactly what each tool did, as if he'd seen worse in another place. While they worked, two of the scientists whispered near the door. One said quietly, "He didn't just fight. He planned." Like he knew he was being watched. The other replied, "Maybe he did. Maybe that's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't just survive, he learns." Later that evening, the senior researcher reviewed the data again. Heart rate, stress levels, oxygen use, everything pointed to something unusual. During the fight, the human's heartbeat barely changed. When the beasts attacked, it rose for a few seconds, then dropped again, steady as if he were in training. No fear, no panic, just control. The officer didn't like that. He wasn't afraid of the human himself, but he feared what others might think if the story spread. The Dominion thrived on power. They ruled through fear. If one human could survive what others couldn't, that fear might shift, away from them and toward something new. So they made a decision. The test wasn't over. The next day, the human was taken back to the containment dome. But this time, things were different. The environment had been changed. The mist thicker, the ground uneven, filled with traps and machinery. The beasts were gone, but new challenges waited. The Dominion wanted to see what he would do when faced with a world that shifted against him. They dropped him in with a few supplies, a ration pack, a small knife, and a piece of broken armor. That was all. The observers watched closely as the human stood there again, silent, scanning everything. Then, without hesitation, he started moving, testing the terrain, marking his path with small symbols using a rock. The scientists noted how calm he seemed. "He's treating it like a training ground," one said. Hours passed. He built a shelter from fallen panels and vines, then used his knife to carve out small traps for the wild creatures roaming the dome. He didn't waste a movement. Every action had purpose, but what truly unsettled the observers wasn't what he did. It was what he didn't do. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He didn't even speak. It was like he was saving his energy for something else. When night fell, the dome lights dimmed automatically and strange sounds echoed from the shadows. The Dominion had released smaller, aggressive creatures this time, not as deadly as the Targash beasts, but quicker and unpredictable. They crept through the dark, hissing softly, their glowing eyes scanning for prey. The human stayed awake, waiting. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. When one of the creatures crawled close, he struck fast. No hesitation, no wasted motion. He didn't kill it. He scared it away, making it retreat into the dark. The scientists watching were speechless. One whispered, "He's controlling the fear, not just his, but theirs." The commanding officer crossed his arms, pretending not to be impressed. "He's still trapped. He just doesn't know it yet." But he was wrong. The next morning, the human began searching the edges of the dome. He touched the metal walls, studying their vibration, listening to faint hums beneath the surface. He found the maintenance hatch again, the same one that had been used in the last test, and traced the wiring inside it. The observers grew nervous. "He's not just surviving," one said. "He's learning how this place works. He can't possibly break through," another replied. But even as they spoke, the human twisted a few pieces of wire together, connecting them with a shard of metal from the armor. A faint spark flickered. The lights in one corner of the dome flickered too. The officer barked an order to disable the feed, but it was too late. The human had already learned what he needed to know, how the system connected to the outside. He didn't try to escape right away. Instead, he waited. He pretended to be tired, slow, defeated. He let them believe he was done. For 2 days, he acted like a man losing strength. The guards even laughed when they saw him lying in the corner. But on the third night, the lights went out completely. Alarms blared across the base. In the confusion, someone shouted that the power grid had been shorted from inside the dome. The command center screens went black for several minutes. When they came back online, the human was gone from the cameras. Panic spread. Soldiers ran through the corridors, searching for him. The senior researcher tried to override the system, but nothing responded. The security doors kept locking and unlocking, like someone was controlling them from inside. Finally, the backup lights came on. The dome's interior appeared on the main screen again. The human was standing near the center, holding the same broken piece of armor. But now it glowed faintly, powered by the dome's own energy cells. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He just stood there, calm as ever, looking straight at the main camera. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the human raised his hand and tapped the glass in front of him twice, slow and deliberate. The sound echoed through the speakers. Tap, tap, everyone froze. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a threat. It was a message. He knew they were watching, and he wanted them to know. He was watching back. The commander ordered the sedation gas to be released, but when the vents opened, nothing came out. The human had already disconnected the internal systems. The only thing left was silence. After several tense minutes, they finally managed to open the outer door using manual controls. When they entered, They found him sitting calmly on the floor again, the glowing armor piece beside him. He didn't resist when they restrained him. He didn't speak a single word, but everyone in that room could feel it. The power had shifted. It wasn't about strength or weapons anymore. It was about fear. The soldiers avoided looking him in the eyes as they led him out. Even the commander, proud and unshaken before, hesitated for a moment when their eyes met. There was something in that quiet stare, not anger, not hate, but understanding, like he already knew how this would end. That night, as the Dominion officers held their meeting, the lead researcher spoke softly. "We've learned what we needed to." But the commander shook his head. "No," he said. "We've only learned that we never understood them." Outside in his new cell, the human sat quietly, staring through the glass wall at the stars beyond. He didn't know where he was being taken next. Maybe another test, maybe something worse. But he didn't care, because deep down he already knew something the Dominion hadn't figured out yet. Fear wasn't a weapon you used on humans. It was a weapon they learned to master. And soon they would learn. The more you tried to break them, the stronger they became. The Dominion thought they had broken him. After the second test, they decided to keep the human under closer watch. They didn't dare send him back into the dome yet, not after what happened with the power system. The engineers were still trying to understand how he'd caused that short circuit using just scraps and broken wires. In the control wing, the officers spoke in low voices. None of them wanted to admit it, but there was fear in their tone. Not fear of what the human could do physically, but fear of what he knew. Somehow, in only a few days, he had learned how their systems worked, how their people reacted, and even how their machines could be turned against them. They moved him to a new facility deeper underground, where the walls were built from solid alloy, and the air smelled like metal and chemicals. The guards changed daily. None stayed long. They always requested reassignment after a few shifts. No one liked being near him for too long. There was something about his silence that unsettled them. He didn't speak. He didn't resist. He just watched. Every time someone entered his cell, he studied them, the way they held their weapon, the way they breathed, the small details that most people never notice. One of the guards whispered to another, "He doesn't blink like we do. It's like he's always thinking, always planning." And he was. Each day followed the same pattern: a meal in the morning, medical checks in the afternoon, and then long hours of quiet isolation. The researchers thought the silence would wear him down, but it didn't. If anything, it made him stronger. The stillness gave him time to think, to piece things together. He remembered the hum of the machines, the patterns in the guards' patrols, and even the timing of the power fluctuations at night. He noticed everything. One evening, when the guards were switching shifts, a faint vibration passed through the floor. It was distant, rhythmic, like engines far away. He lifted his head, listening carefully. He'd been in enough bases to know what that sound meant. Movement. Something big was being prepared. In the command chamber above, the Dominion leaders had gathered again. The head researcher spoke first. "He's more than a soldier," she said quietly. "He adapts faster than anything we've seen. If even a small group of his kind are like him, they're a threat to every system we control." The commander gave a sharp look. "You're suggesting we fear them?" "I'm suggesting," she replied, "that fear might already be spreading." And she was right. The story of the experiment had already leaked beyond the base. Other soldiers whispered about it during their breaks. They called him the Death World Ghost, the man who outsmarted beasts and broke their systems. Some said they saw him move like a shadow. Others claimed his eyes glowed in the dark. The rumors grew with every telling. The Dominion didn't want legends. Legends caused doubt, and doubt caused rebellion. So they decided on something drastic. They planned to send him to another planet, a mining world with harsh conditions and no chance of escape. There he would disappear quietly, forgotten. No one would ever speak of him again. But humans have a strange way of surviving when the odds are against them. When they came to move him, he didn't resist. He let them chain his hands, lead him through the metallic corridors, and push him into the transport shuttle. The guards stayed silent during the flight, but he could feel their unease. The hum of the engines, the faint smell of ozone, the rhythm of footsteps, all of it painted a picture in his mind. He wasn't planning revenge. He was planning survival. The shuttle landed hours later on a gray, rocky world. The air was thin, the wind sharp, carrying dust that stung the eyes. The facility there was smaller, colder, run by fewer officers who barely spoke. They treated him like an experiment that had gone wrong, a mistake they didn't want to think about. Days passed quietly. He worked in the mines with other captives from different worlds. They all had the same look, tired, broken, silent. But he wasn't like them. He moved with purpose. He studied the guards, the machines, even the rhythm of the ventilation fans. The others noticed. One night, while resting near the work tunnels, a small creature approached him. Its skin was rough, its voice trembling. "You're the one from the stories," it whispered. "The one who faced the beasts." He didn't answer. "They said you made them afraid," the creature continued. "Even the soldiers fear you." He looked up at the dim ceiling. "Fear isn't power," he said quietly. "It's what happens when people forget what they're capable of." The creature didn't understand fully, but it nodded anyway. From that night on, the others began to watch him differently. They followed his lead, even without words. He never told them what to do. He just showed them by example, fixing broken tools, finding new ways to carry loads, teaching them to read the guards' patterns. Slowly, a quiet unity formed among them. They started working together, protecting each other from harsh overseers. And above, in the Dominion base, the officers noticed something strange. The mining numbers improved, the captives fought less, and the area stayed calm. Too calm. They thought the human had finally accepted his place. They couldn't have been more wrong. One evening, when a heavy storm rolled across the planet, lightning struck near the main power lines. The guards scrambled to restore the system, leaving the tunnels unmonitored for a few minutes. It was only a short window, but it was enough. The human moved quickly, using the confusion to reach the maintenance sector. He didn't run or rush. Every movement was measured, quiet, precise. He knew exactly where to go, as if he had mapped the facility in his mind. He didn't want chaos. He didn't want destruction. He wanted freedom. When the power came back, the guards found the door to the outer mine open, the security locks overridden. They searched everywhere, but there was no sign of him. Just a few footprints leading into the dust storm outside. They assumed he wouldn't survive. The storms were deadly, the air too thin. No one could last more than an hour. But days later, a patrol found strange markings carved into a rock formation several kilometers away. They weren't random, they were human words. Simple, clear, and chilling, I learn. After that, sightings began across nearby sectors. Unmanned outposts reported strange activity. Missing supplies, power outages, and security cameras going offline for hours. Someone was moving through the systems, unseen but always one step ahead. The Dominion dismissed it at first, saying it was malfunction or rebels, but deep down they knew. He was alive, and he was learning everything they didn't want him to know. In the research base where it all started, the senior scientist watched the old recordings again. The moment when he looked straight into the camera, calm and unshaken. She replayed that scene several times, then turned off the screen. "He's not our experiment anymore," she whispered. "He's the teacher now." From that point on, the Dominion stopped capturing humans. They claimed it was inefficient, but everyone knew the real reason. They didn't want another one like him, someone who could turn fear itself into a weapon. And somewhere out in the dust and wind of a forgotten world, the human kept walking. Alone but never lost. Each step carried the same quiet promise, that no cage, no creature, and no empire could ever hold a species that refused to give up. The beasts had feared him once. Now the galaxy would learn to do the same. The storm that night had saved him. The lightning, the chaos, the confusion, everything had lined up perfectly. When he walked out of that mining base, he didn't look back. The air was thin and cold, cutting into his lungs, but he kept moving. He knew the storm would cover his tracks. The landscape around him was endless gray rock and dust. The wind screamed, carrying sharp grains that felt like knives against his skin. He had no food, no water, and no direction. But he had something else, willpower. That was enough. For the next few days, he walked without stopping. He learned how to breathe slowly, conserving what little oxygen the air carried. He found shelter under stone ridges when the wind became too strong. When night came, the cold bit into his bones, but he kept his body moving, pacing in circles to stay awake. He wasn't running from them anymore. He was learning from the world around him. Every new struggle taught him something. Back at the Dominion base, panic had spread. The officers had expected a quick recovery mission. Maybe find his body, maybe bring back proof of death. But they found nothing. No body, no trace. Only a few markings scratched into the stone far from the mine. The commander slammed his fist on the table. "He can't survive out there." The head researcher looked at him quietly. "He already has. That's what they do." The commander didn't reply. He didn't want to admit that fear had crept into his chest. Meanwhile, far from the facility, the human had reached the edge of a canyon. Deep below, a faint light shimmered through the dust, signs of machinery. It wasn't Dominion-made. The design looked older, forgotten, maybe abandoned. He decided to go down. It took him hours to climb carefully, finding handholds on the rough surface. Every few feet he stopped to listen for movement. By the time he reached the bottom, his hands were bleeding, but he didn't stop. He followed the faint hum of power until he reached a half-buried structure. Inside, he found what looked like an old research outpost. Rusted panels lined the walls. Some lights still worked. There were broken containers, old tools, and dust everywhere, but to him it was a miracle. Shelter. He searched the rooms one by one. Most were empty, but one still had a working console. He powered it up carefully. The screen flickered, showing fragments of old data, maps, weather readings, and communication logs. He couldn't read all of it, but he saw one thing that made his heart steady: coordinates. They led to another outpost far away. If he could reach it, maybe he could find a working transmitter, maybe even a way off this planet. He rested that night for the first time in days. The wind howled outside, but inside the abandoned station it was quiet. He sat by the broken console, thinking about everything that had happened. The cage, the beasts, the endless eyes watching him through glass. He remembered how they had called him an experiment. But now out here he was something else, not a prisoner, not a test subject, a survivor. The next morning he packed what little he could, a metal pipe, some cables, and a few energy cells he found lying around. He built a small pack from torn fabric and began walking again, following the coordinates. The journey was brutal. The terrain grew worse, sharp cliffs, frozen dust, endless silence. He had to ration his strength carefully. Sometimes he stumbled and fell, scraping his knees on the rock. Every step hurt, but every time he got back up, he told himself quietly, "Keep going." He didn't know if anyone would ever find him, but that wasn't the point anymore. The only thing that mattered was to keep moving forward. Days turned into weeks. He learned how to find water by melting ice buried deep in the rocks. He built small fires using bits of old wiring. The stormy skies would sometimes flash with distant lightning, lighting up his path for a moment before disappearing again. Meanwhile, in the Dominion Command Center, the story was spreading faster than ever. Ships passing through nearby systems reported seeing strange signals, faint transmissions using old human codes. The officers didn't believe it at first, but when the pattern repeated in multiple locations, they realized what it meant. He was still alive and moving. The commander tried to contain the news, but it was too late. The story had escaped the base, traveling through traders, soldiers, and travelers across sectors. It became something larger than just one man. People began to say that a human was walking through the void, surviving worlds that killed others. Some said he couldn't die. Others said he was coming back. The Dominion wanted to stop the rumor, but every time they tried, another story appeared. From another world. Another witness. Fear was spreading like fire. On the barren planet, the human finally reached the second outpost. It was older than the first, but parts of it still worked. He entered carefully, ready for anything. Inside, he found empty rooms, faded symbols on the walls, and the faint hum of a reactor buried deep below. He followed the sound until he reached a small control room. The screens were cracked, but one still flickered faintly. He touched it, and lines of alien text appeared, some familiar, some not. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the numbers, coordinates, frequencies. It was a communication terminal. He worked carefully, connecting wires, using parts from his pack. He didn't know if anyone would hear him, but he had to try. When the console powered up fully, he entered a simple message. He didn't ask for rescue. He didn't beg. He just sent a signal, a simple broadcast with one phrase: "I am alive." The message traveled far across space, bouncing from one old satellite to another. Somewhere someone would hear it. He sat back, breathing slowly, watching the lights blink. For the first time in a long while, he let himself rest. Back in Dominion space, the signal hit a monitoring station. The technicians were stunned. It matched the human's biosignature. The commander ordered the report deleted immediately, but again, it was too late. The data had already spread through independent networks. Soon, the entire region was talking. He's alive. The human from the beast test. He survived the death world. They couldn't kill him. Fear began turning into something else. Respect. Even the species who once looked down on humans began to whisper that maybe they were stronger than anyone realized. Inside the outpost, the human didn't know how many people heard him. He didn't care. He stepped outside and looked up at the sky, gray, stormy, endless. Somewhere out there were others like him. Maybe they were fighting, maybe surviving, maybe waiting. He wasn't alone anymore, even if no one was standing beside him. That thought gave him strength. He built a small shelter near the outpost and stayed there for a while, gathering his strength, fixing the transmitter, sending short bursts of messages every few days. Each message was simple, never more than a few words. I endure. I learn. I adapt. Each time he sent one, he smiled faintly. It wasn't about being rescued anymore. It was about being heard. And across the stars, those simple words started to change things. People began painting them on walls, ships, and gear. I endure, I learn, I adapt. It became more than a message. It became a symbol. The Dominion tried to deny it all. They called it a hoax, a story made up by rebels. But every soldier who had seen him with their own eyes knew the truth. They had seen the way he looked at them, not with hate, but with understanding. They had felt that calm power that made even monsters hesitate. They had seen what fear really looked like, not in his eyes, but in their own. And so, far from the places that once tried to break him, the human stood under the endless sky, a quiet figure against the wind. He had no army, no weapons, no plan, but he didn't need them, because he had already won something far greater. The belief of those who had once called him weak. And that belief would soon echo across worlds, reaching places even the Dominion couldn't silence. He had terrified beasts. He had frightened his captors. Now, without even trying, he was beginning to change the galaxy itself. The wind had calmed. The sky was still gray, but the storms had finally begun to fade. For the first time in months, the air was quiet enough for him to hear his own heartbeat. The silence felt strange, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what he would do next. He had spent many days inside the old outpost, learning how it worked, repairing the systems that still functioned. The more he explored, the more he realized that this place had once been part of something much larger, a network of ancient research stations built long before the Dominion had claimed this planet. It was almost as if the past had left him a map, a path to follow. He studied the screens at night, tracing the faint lines of power grids and signal relays. Most were dead, but one line still glowed weakly far to the north. It could be another outpost, maybe even a working one. He decided to go. Before leaving, he packed his few belongings, the pipe, the cables, the small bag, and one metal plate he had carved words into. I endure. He left it inside the outpost right beside the console, a message in case anyone ever came after him. Then he stepped out into the cold morning and began walking again. The land stretched endlessly before him, rocky, broken, and quiet. The wind had softened now, carrying a faint hum, almost like a whisper. He walked for hours, following the faint signal on a small handheld scanner he had built from scraps. The signal was weak but constant, a single blinking light guiding him forward. Every day was a test. He woke up with frozen fingers, melted bits of ice for water, and rationed what little energy cells he had to warm himself at night. But each sunrise gave him strength. The storms that once tried to kill him now seemed like background noise. He had grown used to them. Sometimes he thought about the Dominion, about the scientists, the guards, and the creatures they had trapped him with. He wondered what they thought now. Did they still see him as an experiment? Or had they realized what they had created? He didn't know. But deep down he hoped they were watching. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted them to see that no cage could ever break the human spirit. Days turned into weeks again. His clothes were torn, his boots nearly falling apart, but he kept walking. He had learned how to make fire from sparks and scrap metal. He had learned how to use the energy from the air to charge small devices. Every obstacle only taught him something new. And slowly, the world began to change around him. The gray dust gave way to red soil. Strange rock pillars rose from the ground, covered in old markings. Some looked like carvings on symbols of creatures long gone. He touched them as he passed, feeling the rough surface under his fingers. Maybe others had been here once. Maybe they had faced the same struggle. One night, while resting under a cliff, he saw something in the distance. Lights. Not the faint glow of storms, but steady artificial lights. It meant there was life, or at least technology still working somewhere ahead. His heart raced, but he didn't rush. He moved carefully, watching from a distance until he could understand what he was seeing. Through the haze, he saw tall metallic towers and a faint dome. Another base, but not Dominion-built. The walls were round, older, covered in vines and dust. It looked abandoned, but something was still alive inside. He waited until nightfall, then approached quietly. The main gate was half open, rusted and silent. He slipped through and entered the dome. The air was stale but breathable. He followed the sound of a faint hum deeper inside. Then suddenly he froze. There were shapes moving ahead. Not Dominion soldiers. Not human, but machines. Small spider-like drones moved slowly across the floor, cleaning dust and checking pipes. They didn't attack. They didn't even notice him. They were simply performing their duties. Machines that had been working for years without orders. He stepped closer to one, moving slowly. The drone paused, its sensor blinking. It scanned him once, then continued working, ignoring him completely. That's when he realized when this base wasn't guarded. It wasn't controlled. It had been forgotten. He found the control center soon after. The walls were covered in moss and cracks, but the screen still glowed faintly. He activated the main console and waited as the system came alive, displaying symbols in an old alien language. He couldn't read much of it, but one word appeared again and again. Haven. It wasn't a research base. It was a shelter. He searched the storage rooms, finding boxes of old supplies, metal, dried food, even medical kits. He sat down on the floor and laughed softly for the first time in months. It wasn't much, but to him it was paradise. That night he built a fire in the main hall and sat near it, staring at the flames. The warmth touched his face, reminding him of Earth, of places he hadn't seen in years. He thought about home, about oceans and forests, about laughter. For a moment he almost forgot he was on a cold alien world. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end. He began exploring the deeper levels of the base. One tunnel led to a large chamber filled with pods. Some were broken, but others still glowed faintly. Inside he saw figures, not human, but other species. Frozen, preserved, maybe asleep for centuries. He didn't touch them. He just stood there quietly, realizing this place had once been a refuge for those escaping something terrible. The thought made him uneasy. Maybe the storms and the silence weren't natural. Maybe something had happened here long ago. He spent days studying the data from the consoles, piecing together fragments of history. The base had been built during a great war, meant to protect survivors. But then the transmission stopped. The people never returned. Only machines remained to maintain what was left. It was strange. The more he learned, the more he saw how much different species had in common. Fear, hope, and the will to survive. One evening, while trying to repair a damaged transmitter, he accidentally activated an old beacon. It flashed once, then again, sending a signal far into space. He didn't know who would receive it. Maybe no one. But somewhere far away, someone noticed. In a Dominion monitoring ship, a technician saw the old beacon code appear on the radar. "Signal detected," she said quietly. Her commander looked at the readings, the same pattern as before. Human origin. The room fell silent. The news spread quickly. The higher command ordered all ships to avoid the area. "Do not engage," the report said. "Observation only." They feared what they didn't understand. Back on the planet, he sat near the fire, watching the sparks rise. He had no idea his signal had already reached half the galaxy. To him, the fire was just warmth, a small comfort in an endless struggle. But to others, it was a sign, proof that the human who had once been caged was still alive. still surviving, still enduring. Soon, rumors began to grow stronger. Some said he had tamed beasts. Others said he had destroyed entire outposts with nothing but his mind. None of it was true, but the stories didn't need to be. What mattered was the symbol he had become. Every traveler who heard the name, the man who survived the beasts, spoke it with a kind of awe. They said he was not just a man but a message, a reminder that no matter how dark things became, there was always something stronger in the human heart. And far from all those voices, he sat quietly under the same gray sky, looking at the stars. He didn't know how far his signal had gone. He didn't know that people were whispering his story in every corner of space. He only knew that he was still here, still breathing, still learning. He thought of the creatures he had once shared a cage with, the beasts who had once feared him. He wondered what had happened to them. Were they alive? Did they still remember him? Maybe in their own way they did. He smiled faintly at the thought. Then he whispered into the wind as if speaking to them across time and distance, "I hope you made it too." The fire crackled beside him, and for a moment, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, another storm, another challenge, or another discovery. But he had learned one simple truth. He could survive anything, because the world might break his body, but it could never break his spirit. And out there, across the stars, more people were starting to believe the same. The sun rose weakly over the horizon, painting the gray rocks with a faint red glow. The air was still cold, but not as sharp as before. He stood outside the dome, his breath visible in the chill, staring at the sky. Somewhere out there, his message had traveled. Somewhere, someone had heard him. But he wasn't waiting to be saved. Not anymore. He had changed. The man who once woke up in a cage, surrounded by beasts and fear, was gone. What stood here now was something different. Quieter, calmer, but stronger than anyone could have imagined. He spent his mornings exploring the land around the base, studying the soil, the air, and the small signs of life beginning to return. The storms had become less frequent. The world that once tried to kill him now felt almost alive, as if it was slowly healing. He began planting small seeds he found in old containers just to see if they'd grow. To his surprise, a few did. Every small leaf that broke through the dust felt like victory. Days passed peacefully, but far away, chaos was brewing. His last signal had not just reached a few outposts. It had spread across hundreds of systems. Traders, soldiers, explorers, and everyone had heard it. And each version of the story became bigger, more powerful. Some said he had survived on a dead world without food or air for years. Others said he had built an army of machines. A few even whispered that he had tamed the very beasts that once terrified him. The truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what he represented. He had become a symbol, not of war, not of rebellion, but of endurance. The galaxy had always seen humans as fragile, too emotional, too reckless. But now, they saw something else. A being that refused to die, that refused to give up, no matter how impossible the odds were. In the Dominion Council chambers, the leaders argued endlessly. "He's just one man," one of them said, a story blown out of proportion. But another replied quietly, "Then why are soldiers refusing orders? Why are workers painting his words on their walls?" No one had an answer. Across colonies, the phrase "I endure, I learn, I adapt" began to appear everywhere, scratched into metal, painted on ships, whispered between crews before dangerous missions. The Dominion tried to silence it, to erase the message, but it was too late. The idea had spread beyond control. Back on the desolate planet, the man had no idea how far his story had reached. He was focused on one thing, building a life from what remained. He fixed the power systems, cleaned the old hallways, and repaired the drones that still functioned. Slowly, the empty base began to feel like a home. At night, he would sit near the small fire he had built and listen to the wind. Sometimes he spoke softly, even though no one was there to listen. He talked about the stars, about the beasts, about the strange feeling of peace that had settled inside him. He didn't know it, but satellites orbiting the planet had started picking up faint power signatures again. Observers sent reports back to Dominion Command. The human was still active, still building, still alive. The higher officials debated sending a ship to capture him again. "He's too dangerous to be left alone," one of them said. But another warned, "If we attack him now, it'll prove everything people already believe and that we fear him." So they waited. watching. Meanwhile, deep in the quiet of the base, he discovered something new. Behind a sealed door, he found an old hangar, and inside it, a small shuttle buried under layers of dust. It was damaged but not destroyed. The engines were old, the wiring fragile, but to him it looked like freedom. For days he worked tirelessly. He scavenged parts from drones, patched the hull with scrap metal, and tested the fuel systems. Every night he slept only a few hours before starting again. His hands were cut and burned, but he didn't stop. When the engines finally gave a weak hum of life, he smiled for the first time in weeks. He placed his hand on the hull and whispered softly, "We're getting out of here." He wasn't sure where he would go. Maybe to find other humans. Maybe just to see the stars again. But he knew one thing: he couldn't stay hidden forever. The galaxy had already turned his survival into a legend. It was time to face it. Before leaving, he wrote a final message on the console inside the base. "If anyone finds this place, remember, we are more than what they think we are." He powered up the shuttle and climbed aboard. The cockpit lights flickered weakly, but the systems held. He set the coordinates for open space and sat back, breathing slowly. As the engines roared to life, the ground shook, scattering dust and stones. The sky filled with smoke as the ship rose from the surface. For the first time in a long time, he felt weightless, not just in body but in spirit. The stars opened up before him, endless and bright. Far from the planet, Dominion ships picked up his departure. Some captains hesitated, unsure whether to intercept or stay away. The command gave no clear orders. No one wanted to be the one to face him first. He drifted through the darkness, following the faint signal trails of old satellites. He didn't rush. He simply watched the stars and the glow of distant worlds. It had been so long since he had seen colors like these. Deep blues, golden light, and the quiet black between them. Every star reminded him of the same truth. Life always finds a way to keep going. After several days, he detected a nearby station. It wasn't Dominion. It was independent, run by traders and explorers. As he approached, he turned off most of his systems, not wanting to alarm anyone. The small station shimmered with faint light, surrounded by old cargo ships. He docked quietly, stepping out into the corridor. The air smelled of metal and oil. People turned to look at him, dirty clothes, scarred hands, calm eyes. No one recognized his face, but they felt something in the way he carried himself. Quiet strength, the kind that didn't need words. He didn't announce who he was. He just asked for food, a drink, and a place to rest. The traders gave it to him without question. But later that night, when one of them checked the old news channels and saw his face in the Dominion warnings, they froze. "It's him," one whispered, "the one who survived the beasts." But when they looked at him again, sitting alone in the corner of the room, he didn't look like a monster or a hero. He just looked tired. He noticed their eyes but said nothing. He didn't need to. A few days later, he left the station quietly. He didn't want fame or glory. He only wanted peace. Before leaving, he gave the station mechanic a small device, a simple beacon, and said softly, "If you ever find someone lost, send them a signal. Help them find their way." Then he disappeared into the stars once more. Weeks later, the mechanic activated the beacon, curious about its frequency. The moment it turned on, every sensor in the nearby systems lit up. The signal wasn't a call for help. It was a message. We endure, we learn, we adapt. Across colonies and stations, people stopped to listen. Soldiers, workers, and travelers repeated the words softly like a prayer. Even in the heart of Dominion territory, some began to question what they'd been told. And somewhere, drifting quietly through space, the human watched the distant lights. He didn't know that his words had sparked something huge, a quiet movement that was changing the hearts of millions. He simply sat in his small shuttle, watching the stars and smiling faintly. He had once been locked in a cage with beasts treated like an experiment. They had wanted to see if a human could survive the impossible. He did more than survive, he changed everything. Now, even the strongest rulers in the galaxy whispered his words, not out of fear but out of respect. Because in the end, he had proven something that no weapon or empire ever could. You can cage a human body. You can bury a human name, but you can never destroy the human spirit. And somewhere deep in the silence between worlds, that spirit kept moving and quietly, endlessly, forever enduring. Would you like me to create a short emotional epilogue after? Part 6, something that ties the story's message together beautifully for your YouTube. Narration around 400-500 words? It would make the ending feel powerful and complete.